Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have an amazing show for you today. Briahna Joy Gray is filling in for Ryan for the next couple of days. So glad to have you with us, Briahna.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Like Robby said, we do have a great show planned. Our Rising panel is here to discuss President Biden's loss of support among Black voters. And Kim Iverson joins us later on to discuss the approval of Julian Assange's appeal to the UK Supreme Court.
But first, new polls released over the weekend show President Biden continuing to hit new lows with the public as Americans find common ground on their disapproval of the president's performance. The poll found that 61% of Americans believe their income is falling behind their cost of living. When asked their top issues facing the country, the economy was the top concern for 42%, while COVID took just 29%, followed by voting rights, election integrity, and cost of living.
The poll also found that parents are growing more concerned about the quality of their child's education and virtual learning. According to a Gallup poll, Republicans had a 9-point surge in party preference with the public since last year, marking the biggest swing in Gallup's 30 years of tracking.
Yes, not good for the president. So we talk on the show a lot about how I think specifically with the schools, the education situation, parents, not just Republican parents, Democratic parents as well, working class people are frustrated that schools were closed, so long. The most stringent mitigation measures were in place in schools. Their kids were out of schools for forever. It was frustrating for them. It was difficult to coordinate. And I think there is a palpable sense that that is the Democratic Party's fault.
Yeah, look, it's a lose-lose situation. I think this is one of the few debates, or maybe there's many issues like this, where there really is legitimate points being made on both sides. The problem here fundamentally is that there's no alternative child care for most American families, given how expensive it is, outside of the school context. So even parents who might have legitimate concerns about their kids' health going to school still might weigh the cost benefit and say, I don't have an alternative. They need to be in school. I need to go to work. I can't pay for an alternative. And of course, is the problem of the kind of misinformation that has happened around whether or not, Omicron is even really avoidable in this context. And some people coming down, I think, kind of too hard on the left about the danger that is presented to young people has caused there to be a distrust of, I think, the good science out there about what mitigation techniques could be put into place if the government were behaving properly.
Yeah. Oh no! By all means, do what we need to do to make it safer. But there was just a giving up on even trying. Schools in Flint, Michigan, have just decided, we're going remote forever. We have no plan to go back. Like this is a low-income school. There's a lot of people who can't afford to privately educate or do whatever they need to do to get their kids back on track to where their peers are. And the school district isn't even going to try anymore. I mean, that's a really sad reality.
Well, and to the remote learning point, I recently did 2 interviews with folks who live in more rural environments in West Virginia and in South Carolina. And I could barely talk to them on a Skype interview because their internet kept going down. And they both made the point that remote learning is a huge issue in parts of the country where there is not broadband access. So we've had this huge conversation about these infrastructure bills over the last year. And very little of that has been pointed to the fact that this would be something that would really bolster people's ability to do the remote learning that folks have been forced into one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, as Americans look to Biden to solve economic issues and get a better handling on COVID, Biden proposed increasing funding for police. Let's watch that.
Funding proven programs to help fight violent crime. We shouldn't be cutting funding for police departments. I propose increasing funding. Look, we ask cops to do everything, including be psychologists and social workers. Guess what? They need psychologists and social workers.
Biden has requested more than double the funding for police hiring than former President Trump. During his last year in office, the budget was $157 million, while Biden's budget request has jumped to a whopping $388 million. Yeah, this is something I always find funny as a libertarian, because I'm not coming at the police funding issue from either we should not totally defund the police, but I also don't want to give police massive more budgets to do asset forfeiture and be in school. There's a lot of policing I don't want to happen. There's a lot of over policing going on, but just the line that that on the right that Biden is trying to defund the police, but he does the opposite. It's Republican state legislatures that defund the police by not giving them enough funding, which again, there are some police funding things that I think should legitimately be defunded, not the police on the whole.
This feels a lot like what the kids call pick-me culture. I'm not like the other girls. I'm not like the other Democrats. Look at me, I'm going to double police funding, and you should go ahead and vote for me, Republicans. No Republicans are going to vote for you, Biden. It's not going to work. That's not how it happens. You know, who is going to vote for you, who you do need to rely on, is the millions of people, the unprecedented number of people who came out and marched in the summer in 2020, and who registered to vote and had a renewed commitment to the electoral cycle, one which a lot of people were very apathetic about because of the protests around the George Floyd voting and the registration drives that came around the George Floyd protest. Now you are basically thumbing the nose at the very constituency group, the base of the Republican Party that got you elected in the first place. You are going to lose out on your real friends in order to get some cheap date that never wanted you to begin with.
But don't you think certainly the people, who came to Washington, D.C. to march, they want, radically different police norms. And again, I support some of those goals, but people in, the communities affected by police violence have concerns about crime. And I don't know that massively increasing police budgets is the answer. But there is some, I think, concern even within the Democratic coalition, even among people who always vote Democrat, that the party is not taking, the crime question seriously enough.
Well, advocates of increasing police funding have a tall order because they have to actually show a demonstrated correlation between increasing funding and decreasing crime, which they cannot do because it doesn't exist. And the rise in crime that we're seeing right now is correlated very predictably with precarity. We sit here all the time and we have these conversations about the lack of social services, the enthusiasm, bipartisan enthusiasm for checks, the fact that wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living, we have inflation, all of these things. No wonder you're having a boost in crime, but instead of having conversations about how to meet needs of people with resources that exist, by the way, we have a very productive country, productivity has been on the rise. It's not labor's fault that we're in this situation. Instead of figuring out how to return those wages to the people who've actually earned them and keep this country going, we just want to ramp up the mass incarceration machine, and on we go.
Yeah, mass incarceration is a problem. Obviously, I think having more police on the street we would have less crime if we did that. I think there is some statistical correlation that I think we can find some evidence of that.
I looked up some statistics, and you would have to have, I believe, something like 12 more officers to prevent one more murder on the street. And think about what that budget looks like. Yeah. And think about how much money could be spent deterring crime on those salaries of those 12 officers.
The IRS will just defund that, as I'm always talking about on the show, defund the tax police, and we just put it, toward the beat cops.
That is not the solution, because there are a lot of criminals and crooks that the IRS needs to be paying attention to instead of focusing on persecuting people in like the poorest town in Mississippi, which apparently is where they're focusing their effort. Well. But that's neither here nor there. Well, after the Democrats' failure to pass voting rights, the party is turning its attention back toward Build Back Better. Only this time, lawmakers are willing to concede more to Senator Joe Manchin in order to get something passed. Senator Bernie Sanders commented on whether or not he'd support the compromise legislation if Manchin signed off on it. Let's watch.
As perhaps the leading progressive voice in the Democratic coalition, can President Biden count on your vote in the Senate with almost any compromise he comes up with Manchin?
No, you got to look at, no, absolutely not. You're going to have to look at what that so-called compromise is.
Yeah, obviously. Good for him. I mean, why would you say, yes, I'm going to support whatever? I mean, that doesn't make any sense from like a game theory perspective. You don't promise to, I think we played that clip of Marianne Williamson the other day saying that was the smart thing Trump did during the debates when they said, well, will you support whoever the Republican nominee is? And he's like, no, it depends how you treat me.
Yeah. I hate that this makes Bernie Sanders an outlier. The idea of actually using your leverage, it cannot be said enough that every single senator has the power to exert their will that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin do. And I don't want to overstate that. A lot of people, especially on the left, talk about the fact that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are just figureheads for a larger group of folks who don't want good legislation to pass. It's not just them, they are the rotating villains here. But it's important that people who do want legislation to pass and who have interests that are more aligned with the people, because people like Bernie Sanders don't take all the corporate money that other folks like Manchin and Sinema do, are using their voice and their pulpit to say this, to put their foot down and, reveal, exploit, shine a spotlight on the enormous gap between what average Americans want, again, on a bipartisan basis, and what the corporatists in Congress are willing to stymie.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You can't promise ahead of time that you're going to do whatever, that you're going to fall in line to make a little bit of trouble. That's what Sinema and Manchin are doing.
These people couldn't negotiate with a preschooler, I'm convinced.
Yeah. Well, we'll have more Rising for you coming up next. Stay with us.